Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here on time so we could resume the trial promptly this morning. All right, Mr. Mulrow. Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Miss Carter. Good morning. Now, yesterday when we were speaking, I had a little bit of trouble with my exhibit number. So let's start out by showing you a couple photos and seeing if you could tell us a little bit about the people you see in the photos. Okay. Miss Etienne, could we have 795 first? Now, this one I think we did see. But tell us, Miss Carter, who do you see in government 795? That's Spike. And I think you told us a few things about Spike yesterday. But would you wind the clock back a little bit and tell us when and where it was that you first met Spike? At an event they held in Atlanta at his house. What was that event called? It was GD Day. GD Day. Did the whole event happen at his house, or were parts of it held somewhere else? Parts of it started at a park and then it moved to his house. What kind of things went on at GD Day? They barbecued, played music, had events for the kids. It was like a get-together. Do you remember about how many people were there? It was a lot. I couldn't tell you exactly how many. Probably over 100. Was this the first time you met Spike? Yes. And you told us yesterday about the time that Spike called you on the phone and quizzed you about the objection, leading and asked and answered. Overruled for now. So, Miss Carter, you told us yesterday about the time that Spike called you and quizzed you on GD knowledge. Did that phone call happen before or after GD Day? Before. So you had talked to him on the phone before you met him in person? Yes. And did you tell us yesterday that Spike was the governor of Georgia? Yes. How and when did you learn that he held that position? Actually, I learned that from DePayne. So within the first couple of conversations with DePayne. And again, in terms of timing, was that before or after the phone call with the quiz about the knowledge? Before. So fair to say you had heard of Spike before you actually spoke with him? Yes. And then you spoke with him on the phone before you met him in person? Yes. After GD Day, were there other times that you saw Spike in person? Yes. How often would that happen? Pretty often. I went there several times a week, and I'd see him maybe once or twice during that time. You went there, meaning where? To Atlanta. I'm sorry. And where were the specific places in Atlanta that you would see Spike when you went there? At his house. And did you tell us that sometimes he was there and sometimes he wasn't there? True. You're talking about it at his house? Correct. How would it be that you would go to his house and he wouldn't be there? There was always people at Spike's house. What do you mean there were always people at his house? There were people that lived there besides him. He had an open door. It was kind of like a safe place for us. If we wanted to go there, we could. So the people who lived there besides him, you're talking about family members of his? Kids? Organizational members, some of them. At times, he had family members there, but I don't really remember too many times. So you're talking about GDs that would always be at Spike's house? Correct. What kind of things would go on at the house? Listening to music, tattoos. Sometimes they'd have events there, shoot videos. I really didn't get into a lot of what went on there. If I went there, it was for a purpose. And remind us, about how often would you be there? I would be in Atlanta about almost every day, but Spike's maybe once or twice a week. With all these GDs that you saw at Spike's house, did people ever have guns? Yes. How often would you see guns there? Almost every time. And did your contact with Spike continue up until the point where the indictment came in this case, or was there a time where it sort of fell off? No. Actually, Spike and I stopped communicating. When I left Georgia, they decided that they were going to try to put a what was called a GD arrest on me. And I called Spike to ask him why and what it was about. He told me that he felt like it was bogus, his word, bogus, and that if I had the board member call him, he would straighten it out. And that was the last time I talked to Spike. So that happened before the indictment came in this case? Correct. Yeah, a couple years before. I'm going to ask you some more questions about that a little later. Okay. But up until that point, you mentioned communicating with Spike. Would you only see him in person, or were there other ways that you communicated with Spike? We talked on the phone a few times, but not very often. Ms. Etienne, could we have 610, please? Now, I don't believe I showed you this one yesterday, but you recognize the person in 610? Yes, that's Iz. Do you know Iz's real name? Yes. What was that? Manguiro Siddiqui Yisrael. Remind us, what was the position that he held? He was the assistant governor. Ms. Carter, I'm going to ask you the same types of questions about Iz that I asked you about Spike. When was the first time you met Iz? At the same event, at GD Day. The one that was in the park, and then later at Spike's house? Correct. Prior to meeting him in person, do you know whether you ever spoke with him on the phone before that? I did not. Prior to meeting him in person, had you ever heard about him? Yes. And when or from whom did you hear about him, and what did you hear? DePayne and AO. At the time, I believe I don't know if he was a second coordinator or a regent, but they told me his position and just talked about he was a cool guy and he did, handled music. He was like a producer. Did he have a studio or a radio station or something like that? Yes. Later on he did. Do you remember what the name of that was? LTG Productions. And so you heard about him initially through DePayne and AO? Yes. And did you tell us yesterday that DePayne was sort of your introduction to the GDs here in Georgia? Yes. Was he the source of a lot of the information you were getting at the beginning? Yes. Now, after meeting Iz for the first time at GD Day, would you see him again after that? Yes. How often would that happen? In the beginning, maybe once or twice a month. I didn't have a vehicle at the time, and I would see him because I would go to meet China, and they lived together. I'm going to walk up to you, Ms. Carter, with an exhibit that's labeled for identification, Government's 611. Okay. Take a look at the printed photo and tell us if you recognize the person in the photo. Okay. Yes, I do. Who is the person in Government's 611? That's China. The China you just told us about? Yes, sir. Move to admit 611. Admitted without objection. And did you tell us that Iz and China were in a relationship? Yes, sir. May I have 611 on the screen, please, Miss Etienne? So what was China to you? My first lady. What does a first lady mean? She's the equivalent as the governor, but on the female structure. Is that the Sisters of Struggle that you were telling us about yesterday? Yes, sir. So, First Lady was a leadership position there? Yes, sir. Was it a high leadership position? It was the highest you could get in the state. What kind of things would she do as a First Lady? She would organize. Well, really, she was supposed to organize events, make sure that dues were in order, have meetings with any of the positions of authority, and make final decisions. And then, did you tell us yesterday that you, yourself, held positions of authority in the Sisters? That's correct. Was it China that gave you those positions? Yes. And we got onto China because I was asking you about Iz. So, let me ask this. Would you usually see them together, or would you sometimes see them separate? Both. And what kind of places would you see Iz? Usually at his house, at his recording studio, Maybe at one of the clubs that he held events at, or Spike's house. And what kind of places would you see China? Normally at her house or at the flea market. Well, do you have phone contact with the both of them in the addition to seeing them in person? Yes, several times a day. Pretty regularly in contact, it sounds like? Yes. And then, just like I asked you for Spike, I'll ask you for Iz. When is the last time that you had contact with Iz? I remember the specific day was October 5th. I called him. I had a car accident, and he was the person that I called. I was kind of shook up about it, and that was the last time I talked to him. That's a pretty specific date you remember, October 5th. What is it that makes that date stand out to you? Someone ran in front of my car and I hit them and they died. And he was the person I called. And so I can remember that day very well. What about China? When was the last time you had contact with China? Shortly after that, China called me. Well, I had called her. She didn't answer me back. Then she called me a couple days later and we talked and then everything was fine. She was kind of telling me what was going on with her. Then later on that day, she called me back, accusing me of saying things about her, and we kind of had an argument on the phone. So it was within that same week, and that was the last time we spoke. And again, not to fast forward too much, but you mentioned you moved out of Georgia at one point. Were those conversations with China and with Iz, did those happen before or after you moved out of Georgia? After I left Georgia. Ms. Etienne, actually, Miss Sewell, could we switch it to the ELMO for a moment? Certainly. So, up on the screen now, Ms. Carter, is government's 796 in evidence. Do you recognize that person? Yes, I do. Who is that? Sheikh G. Did you tell us yesterday he was a board member? Yes, sir. When is the first time you met Sheikh in person? At BOS weekend. What year was that? 2012 or 13. And just in terms of the timeline, was this before or after you had met Iz and Spike at GD Day? After. Did someone introduce you to Sheikh? I knew who he was. We had had a conversation on the phone prior, but there was a line of people that we were shaking hands with, and when I shook his hand, he told me who he was. So, just like Iz and Spike, was it the case that you had heard of Sheikh before you met him? Yes. And what did you hear about him when you first started hearing about him? Just his name, really. I didn't hear a lot about him. He had a business he was running called GD Owen, and I really just kind of heard about that and the music that they were putting out. Did you know what his position was before you met him? Yes, I did. And so, did you say BOS weekend was where the handshake line was happening? Yes, sir. Where geographically was BOS weekend? In Alabama. And so people went from Georgia to this event there? Yes. How many people from the Georgia GDs went to BOS weekend in Alabama? I don't know the exact number. It was a lot. Several vans. Several vans? Yes. Did you have any feelings about meeting Sheikh there? I was excited to meet him at the time. I mean, he was an important figure to me, and at the time, it felt like an honor to meet him. What made him an important figure to you? He held a very high position, and it was very rare in the time that I was growing up that you ever met anyone with a high position like that. After seeing him at BOS weekend in Alabama, did you see him ever again after that? Yes, I seen him at the Gangster's Ball. Was that the one with the video that we saw yesterday? No, sir. Was it a different Gangster's Ball? Yes, it was the first one. Where was that one held? In Marietta. And after that Gangster's Ball, did you see Sheikh ever again after that? Not in person. Would you continue to hear about him after that? Yes. Did you ever speak with him on the phone more after that? Yes. When you would talk to Shake on the phone, what kind of things would you talk about?
Really promoting music online. At one time, he had offered me a position to be a secretary for him that I had declined the position. Really, that was what our conversations were about.
And, Miss Sewell, if we could switch back to the government laptop, please. And I'll ask you, Ms. Etienne, to put up government's 776 in evidence. Do you know this person, Miss Carter?
Yes, sir.
Who is that?
Izzy.
And you may have told us about Izzy yesterday, but did Izzy hold a position in the group?
Yes, sir.
And what was his position?
He was over security.
Ms. Etienne, could we zoom in on the middle of his forehead there, please? Do we see some tattoos on Izzy's face here?
Yes.
Are any of those ones that stand out as being significant to you?
Yes.
Which?
The star.
What is that star?
That's one of our symbols.
Now, Ms. Carter, yesterday, toward the end, you were telling us about something that happened in Statesboro, and I think you told us that Izzy wasn't there when that happened. Have you thought a little more about that since then?
Yes. Actually, I would like to correct that. Izzy was there. However, I didn't have much interaction with him there. We didn't really speak. However, he was there.
Okay. So was that just a mistake that you had forgotten yesterday?
It was. I was trying to remember who all was there. But the people that I interacted with are really the ones that stand out to me the most. But I do remember he was there.
Are you feeling a little nervous about testifying here?
Definitely.
I'm going to ask you just about a couple other things that came up yesterday. You were telling us about a violation of someone named Dreddy. And would you remember what was it that Dreddy did to earn that violation?
Yes. I didn't get to completely finish telling you all of that. So he owed money. That was what that came down to. Also, there was an instance where I was living in a house that Dreddy rented to me, and someone actually shot at the house. I did not see who shot at the house. However, one of the, I call them brothers, but one of the members said that it was Dreddy. And so they had questioned him about that. That was one of the reasons that he was violated.
The first part of the reason you said was that he owed money?
Right.
Do you know any more about the circumstances of him owing money?
I just know that it was because they didn't give him the money that was owed for whatever product it was that they were supposed to sell.
What did you mean by product there?
Drugs. But I don't know what kind.